Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Today we're talking to you about coaching in the context of DEIB. And let's quickly move on from the abbreviation and talk about what that actually is. So, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I think for a lot of coaches, they can feel a bit daunted by what does that mean? How do I do it? I don't want to get it wrong. And so, we wanted to open up the conversation today and start to explore that a little bit more with you.
Yeah, and just before we get into the full content of the podcast, one of the reasons we're sharing this with you is because we've got our coaching summit coming up on the 29th of July. And the theme for the coaching summit this year is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So you'll have this podcast to listen to and know that you can come and register for the coaching summit if you're intrigued to sample some more content around that topic as well. And you can sign up at igcompany.co.uk /summit 25. So when it comes to DEIB, as Joe said, it's a topic that coaches, I think, all want to get right. And with that can come maybe some nervousness or feeling timid about the topic. But I think what coaching through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is really about understanding how, well, this is one aspect, how your identity can influence the coaching space, because obviously we're all different and we all bring various identities and intersectionality into the coaching space, which we need to be consciously aware of. So I think it's okay to accept that all coaches will have unconscious bias. That's a really normal part of coaching. So when we step into coaching through the lens of DIB, it's really about raising our levels of consciousness, understanding who we are as coaches and how that might shape the coaching relationship in some ways, which will be helpful, but there may also be ways in which it can be harmful. So really, as you get interested in this topic and you want to learn more, we step into this with a growth mindset and an acceptance that none of us will always get this right. And it's certainly not about getting it wrong. It's about how can we be of most service to our clients and create spaces where clients want to step into them and can be their whole selves within those spaces. I think that's one of the lenses certainly that I look to when I think about this topic.
One of my greatest motivations for being a coach is really about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it comes from a place of recognizing privilege that I had in the upbringing that I had. I had a very safe and loving upbringing, and I very early on was aware that that was not the case for everybody, and my heart longs for that to be the case. So if we just take a little bit to define in very simplistic terms what we mean by diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So diversity is really around how we each have different identities. We represent ourselves differently. We all have different lived experiences. And as a result of that, we all have different perspectives on our life and life in general. And you talked about intersectionality, Zoe, or you mentioned that, which is really about how the different facets of our identities and lived experiences come together to create another completely unique combination of those things. Equity is really about access. So, fair access, recognizing what I mentioned, which is that not everyone starts from the same place. So, as coaches, it's really important for us to think about who can access our coaching, how do they access our coaching, how do our goals and intentions about our coaching impact equity and the ability to access our coaching and coaching in general. Inclusion is really around how do we as coaches create environments where people feel valued, respected, seen. And, these are basic human needs that we have. But it's really important, as you said, Zoe, that we're conscious and intentional. Really think about inclusion. We talk about inclusion, we talk about equity, we talk about diversity, how we invite that in, how we try and nurture that in the spaces that we create. And belonging is, well, Well, I think it's something that we can all relate to. We'll have all had experiences at school, for example, or in different groups where you may have felt that you belonged or you might have felt excluded. Belonging is about moving beyond to that actual felt sense of I belong here, I'm part of this, like I'm connected into it. And we need to be really mindful as coaches, I think, that in the coaching space and the conversations that we have, what are the narratives that we're bringing in? What are the beliefs that we're bringing in? What is it that is, what are we bringing to the space? And we have the ability, and I think it's really important to be aware of marginal voices and bring them in. So Zoe, when we created our group and team coaching program, we put a lot of content in around this area, because whenever you've got, you know, a number of people together, or even two people, you know, in this context, but in the context of group and team coaching, exclusion is something that can be experienced a lot. The systemic influences, and that's the other thing to be mindful of, that when we meet other people, we are always communicating with echoes of all of our pasts, way beyond, you know, what we're present and how we're living in our day to day. So that's a lot that I just covered there. I said it was going to be simple, but you know, as you've been listening to that, your mind might have wandered, you know, into different areas, and that's great if it has.
You know, there's something about coaching and DIB where this is really about a systemic lens. I think, you know, well, that's kind of where I start to look at, which is, you know, the systems of which I'm a part of differ from the systems, even Joe, that you're a part of
Yeah.
and that somebody else is a part of, you know, and they influence everything about my identity and who I am. And I think it's recognizing that and the beauty of it, but also the complexity of it. And so when you're working with a client and you are conscious about DEIB and the impact that it may have on people's lives, you are open to asking questions around, you know, how does privilege play a role in this? And that this might be their goal, or it might be the conflict, or it could be anything that the clients bring up. But you have the confidence and the capability to lean in with curiosity to this part of coaching that I think is often glossed over because it feels vulnerable or fragile, or you're not sure, or you're not certain. And there's always positive intent there. But I think many people want to be able to talk about their identity. They want to be able to talk about the systemic influences, whether that's because of racial influences or religious influences or sexuality influences, or just because identity is so core to understanding myself. And in understanding myself, I can better understand my relationships and my situations. So it's being able to elevate out of the topic, I guess, that the client is bringing, and take yourself up into this more helicopter view to be able to look at how have the systems that you've been a part of brought you to where you are today, and how are the systems that you're part of helping or hindering where you go next. You know, it's bringing a curiosity and an open to which to say to your clients, like, we can talk about this. And you being able to sit in a space where you're okay with those conversations. And I think many people aren't okay because they're just not sure. And you know, bravery, I think, is a big part. Okay, we talk about safe spaces. I know you've talked about brave places before, and I think coaching is a place where both the client and the coach need to be brave, to be able to lean into the crevices, perhaps, that remain unexplored in coaching conversations.
I think that goes right back to, you know, the chemistry conversations and having that curiosity around, you know, what do I need to know about who you are and how you are in this world so that I can best support you as a coach. And you know, client might share lots in answer to that question. They might share very little. And then how, you know, what other questions might you follow up with if that feels like it's a useful conversation there? And I think there are questions you can ask coaches in coaching conversations. There are questions that you might ask yourself as part of your own reflective practice after sessions. So things like, so thinking about the definitions that I gave, there might be questions like, whose voices do I unconsciously center? And that might be for you as the coach. So when I'm asking questions like, whose voices am I echoing out into this space? Or you might ask your client that. And that depends on what their goal is, what you see as the role of coaching. So you talked about like biases and blind spots, and, you know, again, asking yourself that as the coach, but also asking your client. They might be talking about, you know, a goal that they've got, might be in a workplace environment. And you're asking that question not from a place of assumption that, you know, that's relevant or that they have that, but as an offer, an invitation for them to explore something related to their goal that perhaps they wasn't on their radar. And that is one of the core purposes of coaching. Might be thinking about or offer questions around power and privilege, like what power do you have in this situation? What are your privileges here? Questions that maybe the client just hasn't thought about, that could just open up and completely transform the way that they're looking at a current situation, their life, what they do next. So for me personally, I love being in coaching conversations as a coachee where I am asked questions where my eyes literally open as wide as they possibly can, because I just want to take in not only the question, but everything that might be behind that. Without any expectation. It's just like curiosity and excitement and the joy of that. But obviously that takes time, you know, to curate space.
I think one of the biggest challenges on our skills around DEIB is your own judgments and influences. So if you're coaching somebody who's from a different cultural background where you don't have an insight into the expectations of society, the norms, if you like, and a client may be talking about, I don't know, maybe it's a family dynamic where there's an expectation around the way that they run their family unit. And that may be vastly different from the way that you run yours, but the way your community, society, identity runs their family. It's very tricky to sit in a place of non-judgment. Like, I think it's important to accept you probably will have a judgment about what the client is bringing. So how in coaching do you get yourself to a place where you're able to coach in a way where your own biases and judgments don't influence the coaching? How do you keep a space clear of clutter from your own world so that the client is able to explore their own world and what they want? Like, what's the want that they want? What's the want that their community or their system wants? And I think it's okay to name that can be hard. It doesn't mean it's not possible to do, but it can be hard. And I think really the key is the more that you learn about yourself and what you believe and what you think to be right or wrong, and notice, I think there's also this, the somatic, we talked about somatics on a previous podcast, but the somatic, what rises in you when you feel that judgment coming are clues about when you may be stepping out, you know, and cluttering the space with some of your own identity. And supervision is excellent for being able to support you in the place of DEIB, and taking to supervision things like, oh, I noticed when my client was talking about their family dynamic, I had a real sense of wanting to make a suggestion or wanting to really challenge about whether that perspective was a valid perspective or not, because DEIB requires you to be both respectful and to still coach, you know, to still be able to challenge the thoughts and norms that a person brings up when it is in service of their goal. So I think, you know, supervision is a place where you can really gain education about both yourself and also how to be through the lens of DEIB.
think it's worth restating, like, you don't have to know everything. I think it's one of those places where as a coach you can think, oh, I feel like I don't know anything, so I'm not going to go there at all. But actually, as coaches, we don't know anything or certainly everything about our coaches' lives. And so if you go back to the basics of coaching, which is around curiosity, it's around contracting and so on. Let's go back to actually, what do you need permission? What do you need to gain permission from, from your client in order to be able to have wholehearted conversations that are respectful, empowering. And remember that in coaching, the client is learning and so are you. So, they're co-created learning spaces. The spaces we create are spaces where, we move beyond right and wrong into a space of not knowing. And so we respect different ways of knowing and being in the world. And we see the value in how we can grow ourselves and in service of others through those things. So some of the things we need to, I think, inquire about and have permission to explore is it's around language. Everybody, different people prefer different language to be used in different situations around different aspects of their identity. And so rather than worrying, oh, I don't know, so I won't ask, or I just won't say, I won't say anything, go there, like ask, show the curiosity, and be open to learning and understanding that that's an important part of how somebody identifies. And for other people, they won't mind what language is used. But no, like, inquire and learn and think about how the space, whether you coach in person or you're coaching online, how accessible is that for somebody? And I think we've talked on different podcasts around some of the factors that can influence accessibility, in different ways. And so being mindful of that is important. So, my encouragement is to kind of put down the burden of getting it wrong, and really lean into some of the skills that you already have, and that space of not knowing, and that the getting, inquiring, asking for permission, I think is what will set you free in that space, so that we can be part of contributing in this world to having more open conversations where we are learning from one another all the time.
I think that piece you mentioned about the, you don't know and the client doesn't know, so I think it's easy to assume if you're working with somebody who perhaps is from a completely different culture to you, that they know how their culture has influenced them. But of course, why would they? Because what is normal to me is not necessarily normal to you or to anybody else. And I think that co-curiosity is the space where you can be free in your thoughts to explore it. They may never have been asked before. How do you think being raised in that family system is influencing your thoughts about your own family today, given that if family is their goal, or if it's about going for promotion and they've spent their majority of working life in one particular culture and now they're in a new culture, you could ask a question around, well, what have you learned, from this culture that's serving you, and what do you want to let go of? These are things that and can you, and can you let go of that? They're just about not needing to be perfect, and really about sowing seeds. And often your client will say something like, do you know, I've never thought about that before. And you might just take a pause and then be like, well, what would you like to spend more time thinking about? And they'll probably tell you, actually, that's really interesting. It's really made me think about this. And they might tell you a story, and then you can coach around what that means for them and what they're learning from it or what wisdom they're gaining from that. So, when we talk about culture, power, privilege, and all these aspects that we're sort of just really introducing to you now, take them as seeds for your own curiosity and think about, what small step can I do to just start to learn more about how equipped I am to create inclusive spaces in coaching.
And this is it's a lifelong practice. So, there are ethical tensions within this aspect of coaching. So, there's a term called performative allyship. So that's about you're sort of acting inclusively, but you haven't done the self work. So it's like, I know this stuff, or I've listened to the podcast and I've heard that, I'm going to go and do it, but not actually doing some of the work beyond that might be useful for you. So, something to be mindful of. And also, I can think, well, how it's always like, how far do you go? How do I know when I'm not doing it, like acting, but I'm actually being? And you and I have invested in doing some of this work, but that work is ongoing for us. I think there's also a risk within coaching, which is, you know we when you've got clients that are from marginalized communities, that are, for example, in systems where there is that still a degree of discrimination that is taking place, the risk is that coaches can coach clients to fit in to a system that is still unequal in some ways at the heart of it. And that can be a real ethical challenge, because you're coaching the individual. The individual is part of an organization. They're choosing to be in that organization, or are, in some ways. So it can get quite complicated. That can be an ethical tension, and something that you might want to explore in supervision and with your client. And so, coaches can think, in that sense, well, I need to kind of stay in my role as a coach here. I'm here to coach. I'm not here to do these other things. But do you call that out? Do you demonstrate that through some of the questions that you ask your client? And then are you coaching from your belief system and what you want to have happen, rather than what the coach wants to have happen and the things that they want? And so I think we've talked about some of the debates in coaching before, but I think maybe a thought worth leaving you with today is around how, as coaches, we can assume that coaching is neutral, and that we as coaches are neutral. And maybe coaching isn't neutral. And what if it was not? And so, challenge there is that our silence, our not saying anything, can perpetuate systems that are unequal or unfair in some way. And so then we go back to, what is our role as a coach with each client that we have? So we're not giving you, there's no answers to that. It's really, an invitation really to, reflect on that and consider, where does that lead you as a coach? And of course, there are natural places around, doing your own reflections. Reflecting with others can be really helpful. And same with our summit. We have a number of speakers at our summit. We can't do everything in a one-day summit, but we want to be able to provide spaces where people can come together, where they can learn and also get curious around, the topics. How do I show up in these spaces? What are the conversations I'm having? What are the conversations I want to be having? How can I do more? And so we hope that in joining us for the summit, you'll be able to join us in being part of continuing to learn, grow, and develop, and being part of a world that is, where we can develop more safer, just spaces. So if you'd like to join us, you can sign up to the summit at igcompany.co.uk/summit25.